Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show, Me, Myself, and TBI. I'm your host, Christina Brown Fisher. My guest is Super Bowl champion and National Football League tight end Ben Utecht. His book, Counting the Days While My Mind Slips Away, A Love Letter to My Family, details Utecht's love of the game, from learning how to catch a football at the tender age of 4 with his dad, a Methodist pastor, to his meteoric rise in the NFL, as well as the career-ending concussions that forced him to walk away. Hi, Ben. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Christina. Glad to be here.
How are you doing now?
You know what? To be honest with you, I am probably stronger cognitively today than I ever have been, and so it's really with a lot of joy that I can say that to you. So I'm actually doing very well.
It's been a long journey, a long time to get to this place.
Yeah, it is, and you know, every day is a journey, right? And I think one of the greatest lessons I've taken away from mine is the relevance that exists within every moment. Right. When you're dealing with memory, you all of a sudden your perspective on life changes, and every moment matters that much more. And so, you know, this journey, which has been so refining, has actually given me a lot more clarity on who I am and the role that I play in the lives of the people that I love the most.
You mentioned memory. Was it memories that really showed you the extent to how bad or how hard the brain injury had affected you?
Yeah, it was, because it was really the consequence that, if I'm being vulnerable, you know, created the greatest fear. And you know, a concussion in football, as you know, is getting your bell rung, right? It's seeing stars, and for such a long time, that was just a part of the game, and it was just something that you shook off and went out and did your job again. But once that started to have memory consequences in my life, it changed, and all of a sudden, it became this injury that was going to have an effect on who I was, not just what I was. You know, so when you have an orthopedic injury, for example, in football, you know that it's going to affect what you are, which is a football player. When you have a brain injury, that then begins to affect who you are.
You were talking about memory, but more specifically, what you were talking about, concussion, getting your bell rung, and how you look at it changes depending on how it's affecting you.
Right. This injury, which was so unique because you really couldn't see or experience what would be a typical orthopedic consequence. You know, if you were to pull a muscle, or if you were to tear a ligament, in an orthopedic injury, you know that those consequences affect what you are, and that's as an athlete. With a brain injury, and as that began to affect my cognitive abilities, I realized that it was not only affecting what I was, but it was affecting who I was. And so that changed everything. Now, all of a sudden, a concussion through education was a traumatic brain injury, and that there are long-term consequences that can come with that injury, especially if it reoccurs. So it began to change the way that I looked at this injury in particular.
Ben, you tell the story in your book of being a young boy in Minnesota, playing ball with your dad, and it becoming your first introduction to football. Can you tell me about those moments, what you remember about those moments, and why they're still so important to you now?
Well, I think intrinsically they hold so much value because of the relationship that exists between a father and a son. And, you know, having played for Tony Dungy, who's one of his greatest passions is fatherhood, you just begin to understand over time as you mature all of the life lessons that exist within that relationship. And so my dad has always been a tremendous leader in our family. I've often said that he brought his ministry home. And he did that by loving my sister and myself through his actions. And so those carry tremendous weight. And I do remember those times as a very young boy, going out into the backyard with my dad and him just sitting there on his knees, letting me tackle him with everything that I had, which to me was massive at the time. And to him probably was just, full of gentle, tickles, really. And so, but that's really where it began, and that created a foundation of joy that was connected to a game. And that fostered, I think, my passion for athletics moving on in my life.
You were a little boy, maybe 4 or 5 years old, when you say you suffered your first head injury. What happened?
Yeah, it's one of those discovery moments, over the course of writing the book. And I remember working with Mark Tabb, who is a New York Times bestselling co-author. And that was one of the questions he asked was, as I shared this story of playing Superman with one of my friends and running around the living room, and we came into a collision moment where I ended up diving over him and going headfirst into the corner of a dresser, and then being rushed to the emergency room. And he said, wouldn't you say that was your first TBI? And I thought to myself, gosh, I never really thought about it from that perspective, but I'm sure that was a part of the injury. And so, the way you look at incidents over your life, for me, changed with my education, and learning more about what exactly a concussion is and how it can affect you.
Do you remember the first time you were diagnosed with a concussion and what that meant to you, or what did you know about concussions?
The first time I was diagnosed with a concussion was playing for the University of Minnesota. And I don't really remember much from the play. I do remember watching it afterwards, and I had gotten spun around headfirst into our enormous left tackle, and was knocked unconscious and came to, had a bloody nose, was brought off the field and diagnosed with a concussion by our training staff. And it really held no value. To be honest with you, it didn't.
What do you mean?
Well, there was no, at the time, there's no real understanding of, what a concussion is, let alone how can it negatively impact your life over time. And so that happened on a Saturday, and I was back practicing on Monday, and I didn't think twice about it.
No downtime,
no downside, and in that situation, I don't really remember what symptoms I was facing, but headaches and sensitivity to light and some of the things that are pretty common across all concussions in football, that didn't really measure up to anything meaningful. Because those happened all the time. When you hit another human being with all you have, whether you're wearing pads or not, you're going to ache. You're going to feel things from the trauma of just, a violent sport. And so that didn't really, I really wouldn't have been able to think past just where I was in that moment.
When I was reading your book and I was trying to keep track of all of the injuries, because there were many besides the concussion. There was the broken pelvis, the broken ankle. I think, were there torn abs as well?
Oh yes, yeah. That was a sports hernia that turned into two. I think there are two individual 2-inch tears, bilateral tears, in my lower abdomen, and I think that was one of the things that was most surprising about the story is is how many injuries I went through, both with concussions, but also with all of the orthopedic injuries that I faced, and just for me, unfortunately, I had one of these injury-prone careers, and that just created obstacle after obstacle to overcome. And it's a part of my story and so many other athletes.
You mentioned the diagnosis of the concussion at the University of Minnesota. That was your second year on the team. Walk me through the other concussions that followed.
I'm trying to recall the others in Division I football, and again, you go back and you try to remember moments where you can now recall facing some of those symptoms. And I know that there were some practice moments. There wasn't another diagnosis in an actual game. And it wasn't until I got to the NFL where I experienced some more diagnosis on the field.
Do you remember which one it was, Ben, where for you it really stood out as,
oh, yeah.
I mean, certainly This is more than getting my bell rung.
Yeah, that was while playing for the Indianapolis Colts, and it was a game against the Denver Broncos. And I can only repeat this from what I remember watching on film the day after the game. I was on the left side of our offensive line, and I had released to block an individual, and I ended up on the ground, and there was a pursuing defender that was running behind me. And as he jumped over me, his cleat clipped the back of my helmet. And on film, you see my head kind of bob downward, and then my body goes completely limp. And to be honest with you, it didn't appear to be a strong hit. I mean, it almost appeared to be soft in nature, but the effect was evident. What was interesting, though, is that I began to regain consciousness, and I got up and was speaking to my teammates, high-fiving my teammates, ran off to the sideline where I'm talking with coaches and physicians, and I remember none of it. It was the first time that I had an actual medical diagnosis of amnesia that came as a result of a concussion. And so it's really hard to put into words what it's like to experience that. You're walking into a meeting room a day later, and you're watching a play that doesn't exist in your memory at all. It's as if somebody had just taken an eraser to the whiteboard and removed it. And so that was the concussion that for the first time changed the way that I began to look at this injury.
Were you scared at all?
That's a really good question. I don't remember in that moment feeling scared. I do remember over the next 3-4 years of my career and recognizing some of these cognitive weaknesses present themselves, that there were moments where my wife and I, just sat there in quietness, just looking at each other, saying, wow, did that really just happen? Or surprised that I couldn't remember something so significant in our lives. And those are the moments I think that, began to create, I think, some authentic fears for the future. And then obviously that was all happening over the course of the concussion crisis. So all of this information now is coming out about, potential long-term effects and the dawn of the CTE diagnosis, and now
the chronic traumatic encephalopathy.
Right. And so now all of these medical scientific truths are which are being distributed through multiple media outlets are now beginning to kind of shape how you look at the injury.
Can you provide context in terms of what you knew and what players as a whole knew versus how it was being addressed by management, by the organizations?
It'd be fair to say 10 years ago, 10 to 12 years ago, and before that there wasn't a lot of medical information provided to players, even though outside of athletics, there was quite a bit of information on traumatic brain injury and the effects, both short and long term, that can have on an individual. And so as I was heading towards retirement after my last concussion and spending a lot more time with physicians, neurospecialists in the medical community, and spending more time researching, I learned so much more about the injury than was ever really presented within any organization. At the same time, I would say with sincerity that I had the greatest respect for our medical staff and training staff, and have never to this day, as you know from reading my book, believed that there was any kind of nefarious behavior that was happening intentionally. I think it had a lot to do with just the culture of the sport.
Yes, that is noticeable about your book. It seems as though you don't necessarily hold the NFL responsible or accountable.
I've just chosen to, I want to have a pro-brain, pro-game message. That's always what it's been about for me. I chose to...
How do you do pro-game and pro-brain?
Well, I think you have to embrace the beauty of the sport. I think when you look at what kind of a platform it's provided for so many individuals, especially the underserved young male adult youth of our country, when you listen to the stories of what so many of those men who grew up without fathers, but will tell you that the coaches that they had in high school and college and beyond played a father figure role in their lives. And I just think that there's so much benefit to the sport. And so with where we've come since that time and the education that exists now, I think it gives us a great opportunity to find balance, right? We know that this is a tough sport. Okay, it's not just brain injury; it's all injury, and it's the reality that I think the average career is 3 years, right? It's not. It's a dangerous and rough sport. So if we can create a platform where we're fully educating the athletes, we are fully protecting them, and taking care of their medical needs, then I think as fans, we can continue to enjoy watching.
Using your example, do you feel as though the relationships that are formed between player and coaches and players among a team, do you feel like that outweighs the risks involved in the game?
Well, I guess it depends on how you approach risks. I tend to think it changes over different age groups. When you're dealing with children, it's a whole nother approach to how to answer the question. When you're dealing with grown adults, it's a whole nother approach to that question. So, as an adult, I think that there's today, more than there ever has been in the history of football, I think that there's a closer balance to where we are in that situation. Now with children, I think that we have a long way to go, because I think you have children that are entering contact football in first grade all across our country. And so that to me is
you think that's too young?
It's dangerous, I think. I've always, as you can imagine, I get asked that question more than anything else. If you had a son which I don't. I have 4 daughters. But if you had a son, would you have him play football? And my answer is, again, about finding the balance between a pro game and a pro brain message. And I was told in my time working with the American Academy of Neurology by a pediatric neurologist that the most important developmental stages of a child's brain are ages 2 to 12. The brain's actually maturing in ways that it never does after age 12. So they're critical time. So for me, as a father of a son who would want to play football, I would be very conservative in my decision making during those ages. And so that to me is what's really valuable, and so, do you need to start football in first grade in order to be an NFL football player? No, you don't. And so at the same time, sports are very valuable to our children and our culture.
As tight end with the Colts in 2007, you won the Super Bowl. Is it true that you don't remember much about that night's game?
No, I would say that there are things, as I began to tell my story, there were blank spots that I just couldn't describe. I think that the scariest time came after my career when we were, sitting down with friends over dinner and talking about our weddings, and I couldn't for the life of me understand why I wasn't invited to their wedding. And I remember saying to our friends, why, I wasn't in any type of camp, why wasn't I invited? And it just got really quiet. And they brought over their wedding photo album, and there I was, page after page, as a groomsman in the wedding, as a singer in the wedding, and I just have no memory of that. No matter how many times you see the picture, it's like, and then you close your eyes and you try to place it, it's just not there. And so those types of experiences, I think were the ones that began to create concern and some very thoughtful pause.
Did you find yourself, Ben, when situations like that arose, did you later find yourself maybe not wanting to engage as much with others? Yeah, I mean, if we're being completely frank about it, I would say that it's really, were you becoming depressed at all in your life, right? Because clearly multiple concussions can have behavioral health consequences, and so what happened for me, and everybody's got their own story and experiences. I think for me, my faith was an integral part of helping me find purpose through all of that. But I'd be lying to you if I didn't share that when you're not functioning cognitively, when your executive functioning, right, your ability to process information in real time is slow and inadequate, you lose your patience and you get very down on yourself. You lose self-confidence and self-esteem. And if you don't have the communication or emotional, intelligence to understand what's happening, all of a sudden you have days where you just don't want to get out of bed, or you spiral out of control, or you snap at people because you yourself are having a difficult time processing the information. All of those things, I did experience on different levels. I know for myself, after my TBI, there was a very long period of time in which I withdrew from friendships, from conversations, period. Part of it would be because of just, quite honestly, overstimulation. I couldn't track and follow a conversation. Sometimes with one person, it was even worse if there were multiple people. And then other times I just was embarrassed by the fact that I may not have remembered something that they mentioned a couple days ago or a couple hours ago. And the safest place to be was by myself.
No, I totally can understand what you were going through. And again, it kind of goes back to just really being blessed to have a support system around me, with my family, my wife, with other passions that were a part of my identity that I was practicing at the time, with music and with some of the things that I wanted to pursue. Those all played a role in helping me come back.
After spending 4 seasons with the Indianapolis Colts and another 2 with the Cincinnati Bengals, you left. Why was that the right time for you to go?
Oh, there's a lot of factors in that decision. I think probably most importantly is family. We just had our first daughter, and that began to change the importance of the future. And so that played a role into that decision. Also, it began to become apparent that my concussion history was going to be a concern for any new team to take the risk. And so there were hurdles within the the scouting of NFL talent that made it very difficult to continue. And for me to continue would have meant basically agreeing to waivers that would release responsibility because of any future concussion in the future. And I just didn't want to play those games with my life. So it just became the right time to do what was best.
It's a little difficult for me to understand how players didn't know or recognize the risk of head injury in football, given all that was already out there about traumatic brain injury. Plus, you're repeatedly slamming into one another. That cannot be good for the body, right?
Yeah.
Can you explain to me why there was still this lack of understanding of the impact of the head injuries among the players?
Well, I think that there's responsibility on both sides, right? This is now your profession. A little bit different in youth sports and in college. There's much more of a familial or parental environment that's created within, the coaching relationship with coaches and trainers and whatnot. Players aren't typically going into any sport. They're not going into those scholarship years or those contractual agreement years, studying medical history of all the injuries that they're gonna face, right? We're not all pre-med and trying to to really understand the anatomy of the body and what it can impact it. So I think that part of that is just kind of this this culture of negligence, right, on both sides. We as players, I was negligent to do any discovery on any injury that I had and or faced, and so at the same time, I think that we could have had more information provided, through staff that maybe has more of that information available.
Ben, you are now an advocate for brain injury awareness for anyone affected by brain injury, not just athletes, but particularly as a former NFL player and given your experience, is enough being done to protect players?
So I I genuinely believe that we have come a very long way. And I think that you are seeing the positive impact that the focus on this injury has created across the country. It's really quite amazing because you now have parents and coaches and teams at every level now that have to go through statewide legislation, right? That is designed to educate and to hold people in position accountable, for the health and wellness of student athletes. And so I do think that we've come a very long way. I would say that the other side to that answer is that we have to continue to grow every single year. So have we come a long way? Yes. Can more be done? Enough? Is it enough? No. And I don't know if we'll ever say that it is enough, because we're constantly going to be learning more and more, and more data will come in and we'll learn more. And so what are we going to do with the new information? And so I hope that we continue through advocacy, finding new ways to elevate player health and safety. And, that's our job as advocates, as champions for the cause, to be able to continue to drive that momentum forward.
In your book, you write about being driven to the point where you felt you needed to document the symptoms that you were experiencing following your concussion. They included random headaches, according to your book, dizziness, sleeplessness, night sweating, loss of balance, fatigue, nausea, hard time driving in a car, snapping at wife. How did you get past all of this?
Oh, man. It's interesting hearing you recite those, because I haven't read that book in a long time, and it's
and you're not experiencing any of those things anymore.
No, but you when you say them out loud, I'm kind of reliving them now in the moment. I needed to document. Number one, because it was a therapeutic form of journaling, but also wanted to make sure that I was doing my best to be truthful in my experiences. I knew I was going to be going through some transitions and some arbitrations, and this was an opportunity for me to make sure that because I was struggling cognitively, this was a chance to make sure that I could provide some more clarity. How did I get through it? Oh man, just by the grace of God, and by like I said, surrounding myself with a support system of people that loved and cared for my wellness. And music played a huge role in that. As a professional entertainer and singer, it gave me an outlet, and I wrote songs about it, and made videos, and those were all a part of this kind of therapeutic process that brought me back. And then I was introduced to a company called Learning RX, which gave me the chance to train again, but in a different way.
Yeah, tell me about Learning RX. It sounded like it was more grueling than training camp.
This was just kind of one of those providential moments. I was co-hosting a television show here in Minnesota, where I'm from, and we were highlighting the services of a company that has dedicated itself to cognitive brain training. And I guess the foundational goals are simple. We can improve your cognitive abilities. And so I set out and I did this 100-hour intensive brain training program, Monday through Thursday, an hour and a half each session, sitting across the table from a brain trainer who was taking me through many different exercises to strengthen a number of different cognitive abilities. My neuropsych evaluation was shocking, to be honest with you. My pre-score, especially in short and long-term memory, showed me to be in the 12th and 17th percentile, which was shockingly low. But after the 100 hours, the 12th and 17th percent went to the 78th and 98th percent. And it was through those 3 months that I just began to regain and even become stronger cognitively than I had been while I was playing.
What were you doing?
Well, there was everything from mathematical exercises, vocabulary exercises, memory exercises. Those were some of the most challenging for me. I had shared my concerns publicly, and this was the first time that they were validated by medical scientifically credible data, saying, "Hey, you're not crazy, Ben. We can show you that you are struggling in these areas." And that ironically gave me a lot of peace. Like, you might think, wow, to get those low test scores back, wouldn't that make you feel even more scared? But the reality was, it actually made me feel like I wasn't crazy. Like, all of these hidden consequences, I can actually show, yeah, I'm really dealing with this. So we did one exercise that was for short and long-term memory, and what they would do is they would give you word distribution. They'd give you we started out with 10 nouns, and they would give you a new word every 6 seconds, and they would have a metronome on the table that was clicking back and forth, and every 2 clicks was a second, right? So click, and every 6 seconds they'd give you a new word, and you'd think to yourself, "Oh, this shouldn't be a problem." So they give you the first word, tree, right? Yeah. And then 6 seconds, and they give you dog, 6 seconds, and then they give you lake, 6 seconds, and I'll tell you, like. You're reciting each of these words over and over again, trying to memorize them as it's happening. But then you get to that 4th word, and all of a sudden that first word it's not really,
you forgot
it's
that
starting
it was tree.
To fade, right? And I remember just sweating, like all of a sudden, like I'm halfway through this list, and I thought I had the first 3, and then the 4th one made the first one go away, and now I can't remember the 4th one, and then it just compounds, and I'm sweating, and I maybe got 3 of the words, and they ask you to recite the words back in chronological order to the best of your ability, forwards and backwards.
Oh my goodness!
Right, and so
oh my goodness,
that was day 1. Right. So
wow.
Day 90, I was able to recite back 25 words, not only nouns, but adjectives and verbs, forwards and backwards. And they were distributed every 2 seconds. I mean, that's how amazing the transformation.
Yeah, that's impressive. Yeah. And you felt like what you were gaining in those sessions, they transferred to the rest of your life outside of the therapeutic setting?
Yes.
Oh, that's great.
100%. Yeah. And a part of that too is just what happens. See, what happens over the course of the 3 months is moments of success. It's winning. Right?
Yeah.
You plateau, and then all of a sudden one day you come in and you're better, and you excel, and you win at these exercises, and then you plateau, and then you win, and you succeed. And you're doing it all along with a personal relationship with another human being across the table. So you're having to have a relationship with that person. You have to communicate with that person. And so a number of things are happening over the course of this. It's not just the exercises. It's relationship managing. It's confidence and self-esteem building, right? All while helping you strengthen injured neural pathways and even the creation of new neural pathways, so the retraining of how you do certain things, right? And so you begin to start applying all of those tactics, even subconsciously, and you come out of it a more assured individual.
So as you do better, you feel better, and then you continue to do better.
Exactly. And it's not just this, it's not subjective. I mean, I think that's one of the issues people have with concussions is that the injury comes across as such a subjective injury because everybody's experience is different. So how do we really believe, when we can't see? Well, it was tangible. This was objective, and it put a little bit more meat on the bone, and that goes a long way.
Ben, you talk about being fortunate in that you had an identity outside of football, your professional singing career. For so many people who have been sidelined by traumatic brain injury, what sometimes makes recovery worse is knowing that they won't be who they were before. Maybe they can't work again, or they can't work in the same job, have the same role. How did you grapple with having the identity of an NFL player, a Super Bowl champion, stripped from you?
I think that it was growing up in a family that told me that my self-worth was greater than a game. That gave me opportunities to discover more layers to my identity. And that's priceless. And unfortunately, there are so many that don't grow up in those types of environments and aren't given those types of truths that create powerful purpose. And so when you remove the game, right, which they have made their entire identity, we experience tragically, unfortunately, we have experienced what that can do to an individual. But for me, it was finding that my identity is much more than just as an athlete, and that as humans we have such incredible potential within the purpose that we really exist for, and that gives people hope, right? And that's what we need in this type of a situation. When a career ends, when one door closes, another door will open. But you have to have hope in that. You got to believe in that, and you got to be willing to walk.
Do you ever have regrets about your career?
No.
Do you think no?
I would go back, however, and change the way I played the game. I played very tall. I'm a tall player anyway. I'm 6'7", but I played tall. And
what does that mean, play tall?
It means that I did a poor job of protecting myself. As a tight end, we run across the middle and open ourselves up to linebackers and safeties, the big hitters on the football field. And so when you look at some of the great wide receivers, some of the great tight ends, and we had them on our football teams, they had such a strong ability to protect themselves, to run out of bounds when instead of taking the big hit, or to see the hit coming and to dive down to get underneath it. And I was not good at that.
I see.
I ran tall, I caught tall, and I went down tall. It just means I gave people a lot to hit, and I took some massive hits. And so I would, I would go back and change some of those things, and again, I wish I went back and did a better job of understanding, some, more about what the injuries are that you do face in this game, and what do you do about it when you do face that.
In 2013, when Aaron Hernandez was arrested, is it true that you approached the New England Patriots about needing a veteran tight end?
So that was an interesting time. I was a couple years out. I had really come back to a place where I've, as you call it, a new normal, right? So I had come back to a place of normalcy. I was in great shape. And there were a couple teams that were really struggling at the tight end position. So those situations across the league motivated me to reach out to my sports agent and say, it wasn't just the Patriots, there was a couple of other teams in there too, but just to say, would you mind reaching out and seeing if there's any opportunity? And again, this was the identity struggle, right? This is so many years of your vocational and emotional identity wrapped up in a sport that it's really hard to let go. And so I presented this idea to my parents because there were a couple teams that I think were willing to at least give me a tryout and see.
How old were you at that time?
Let's see here. That might have been 29, 30, okay. 31, right in that time frame. And I remember sitting down with my parents and my wife and telling them that I reached out and had this conversation and that there was some response, and my dad, just without really any hesitation, said, if you decide to play again, I won't watch a single game.
That's a powerful statement. And
that's the guy that I remember, getting on his knees and letting me hit him as hard as I could, right? And so it was the last nail in the coffin. It was kind of like, gosh, okay, thank you, Dad, because that really, you kind of brought me out of the clouds and back down to reality. And so, it's one of those situations in life that is, you have to go through, right, in order to grow.
Ben, you've described your book as a love letter to your wife and 4 daughters, as a way to preserve memories, even if they one day slide away from you. Do you still feel that way today, that you might one day forget everyone?
I think that the fear, or I should say maybe no longer fear, the sadness that that reality exists is still there, 100%. I mean, who would ever want to go through that? I mean, being an advocate for brain health and just experiencing the caregivers that are going through dementia with their loved ones, or Alzheimer's, or Parkinson's, or Lewy body. I mean, you just can't. You can't fathom what it's like to go through having your loved one there physically, but the essence of who they are slowly deteriorating before your eyes, right? So, I pray that the work that I've put in cognitively will now give me the opportunity to store memories better moving forward. And that chronic traumatic encephalopathy won't play a significant role in my future. But that's all uncertain. And so, because of that uncertainty, I would be lying if I didn't say that there wasn't some sadness that I feel if I begin to think about what that experience will be like for my family.
Then, for our listeners who don't have the superstar, super athlete background that you have, but they are certainly struggling. They have endured a traumatic brain injury. What are the words of encouragement? What are the things that you would say to someone to press ahead and move forward?
That you matter. That you matter. And I mean that with a deep level of love and compassion. You matter. You're significant. You were created for a purpose. Okay. And that there is no difference between me as a very lucky Super Bowl champion, and you. We are one and the same because we have a heart that beats and a mind that functions to do great things in this life. And so, don't let an injury define who you are. Let the way you respond to the injury define who you are.
Ben Utecht. The book is Counting the Days While My Mind Slips Away, a love letter to my family. It's about faith, it's about football, and it's about family. Thank you so much for joining me today, Ben.
Thank you for having me.
Real pleasure. To order a copy of Utecht's book, please visit the Me, Myself, and TBI websites.